Hello, and thank you for viewing this seminar, Keys to Documentation. My name is Tracy Valentine, and I'm a Senior Risk Management Consultant with ProAssurance. The information contained in this seminar is intended as risk management advice. It does not constitute a legal opinion, nor is it a substitute for legal advice. Legal inquiries about topics discussed during this presentation should be directed to an attorney. The goal of this seminar is to enhance your understanding of proper documentation. We will discuss documentation in the medical record, documentation pitfalls, and opportunities for improvement, legal concerns brought on with poor documentation, and finally, licensure requirements and expectations. Improper medical record documentation plays a key role in approximately 10 to 20% of medical malpractice lawsuits. Poor documentation can make defensibility of a malpractice case more difficult. So when we say the medical record, what do we mean? The medical record is a legal document. It can be in electronic format, paper format, or a hybrid of both. The medical record is considered a confidential document, and the information within the record should only be accessible to those individuals with a need to know. The medical record can also be used to enhance patient care, such as through quality reviews and the peer review process. By reviewing errors or near misses in care, we can review process issues that may have broken down and work to create processes that will improve patient care and prevent such breakdowns from happening in the future. The medical record also acts as a communication tool between care providers that are providing care now and to those that may provide care in the future. It allows patients and their care team to communicate with each other through patient portals. In the event of a claim or a lawsuit, the medical record becomes the document that both plaintiff and defense counsel use to review the care provided or not provided, communication that occurred between the patient and the care team, as well as a variety of other information such as lab results, potential delays in care, and so on. The medical record also allows for reimbursement of care that has been provided to the patient, again, stressing the fact that it is a legal record and the importance of accuracy. Where do we find this information? Obviously, we find documentation within the medical record itself. This can be found in nurses' notes, clinician progress notes, orders, care plans, flow sheets, code blue documentation, and a variety of other types of documents. There are also other areas in which we can find documentation that is outside the medical record. This can be found in the form of text messages and emails between members of the clinical team, notes left on assignment sheets, lab specimens, narcotic wastage forms, crash cart checks, and others. Keep in mind, text messaging and emails are not always secure and can be subject to discovery in the event of a claim or a lawsuit. Also, these types of communications can be forwarded without the sender's knowledge. Remember, HIPAA also applies to these types of communication methods. If you must use text or email, use a secure application within your system's EMR. If email or texting are not integrated within your EMR, be careful not to use patient identifiable information and make certain these communications are memorialized in the patient's medical record. We at ProAssurance offer another presentation dedicated to forms of communication with patients where we discuss text messaging and social media, online reviews, as well as patient portals, so please go to our website for this very informative presentation. Let's discuss why documentation is important and what is considered proper documentation. Inaccurate documentation can lead to medical errors and ultimately patient harm. By not having accurate and complete documentation in the patient's medical record, it can leave gaps in what care was provided. Lawsuits can take years to finalize, and when a case presents itself several years later, you most likely will not remember what was done for the patient. You will need to refresh your memory with the contents of the medical record. Also remember, there is no statute of limitations when it comes to board complaints and board actions, so it's imperative the medical record reflect the care provided to your patient. It is important that the documentation in the patient's medical record contains facts and not opinions. One example I like to share is this. You walk into a patient's room and find the patient lying on the floor. Obviously, your first response is to check on the patient, make sure they are okay, and also get their accounting of what happened. When documenting this event in the medical record, you want to document what you saw when you entered the room, not that the patient fell. You didn't witness the fall. You would document that you entered the room and found the patient on the floor, and so forth. You would also document your assessment of the patient's condition and what the patient relayed to you when asked. Again, document facts, not opinions. Your documentation needs to be clear and accurate. You want the next person that will be caring for your patient to know exactly what was going on with the patient prior to them assuming care. So what do we need to document in the medical record? Aside from general care provided to the patient, we need to document any significant patient event in the patient's record. On the previous slide, we mentioned the patient on the floor. It is necessary that this information get into the record. What if we didn't document this, and the next shift, the patient starts to have some confusion? The new staff will have no idea the patient fell and needs further assessment. It is important to give a clear and accurate picture of the care provided. Some other key items to document in the patient's record is the notification of a supervisor, notification of a provider, the patient's pain assessment and reassessment after intervention, any patient education and the patient's understanding of the education provided. It is also important to document a patient's informed refusal of care. An example of this may be reminding a patient of the importance to take their insulin and the consequences if they fail or refuse to do so. We can't force a patient to comply with our recommendations, but we need to make sure that the patient is well informed of the risks of not complying with these recommendations, and this education and informed refusal are documented. Other key facts to document in the patient's medical record are aggressive and hostile behavior. It's important to document exactly what the patient says or does. Even using quotation marks in the record will help show the level of aggressiveness the patient was displaying. It is important to document any de-escalation techniques attempted. Again, the goal is to give a clear picture of what was happening in that moment. We need to make sure any safety precautions we take are also documented, such as a bed alarm in use, side rails in place to assist the patient from falling off the bed, and call light within reach of the patient. We want to make sure that discharge information is documented to show what education we provided prior to the patient's discharge, any questions answered, and the patient's understanding of the instructions provided. If we provided written instructions, we want to make sure we document that as well and what those instructions contained. Next, we're going to discuss some documentation pitfalls that we need to avoid. Obviously, no documentation is not a good practice. As we've discussed on the previous slides, documentation is key to provide other clinicians with a clear picture of the patient's care. Inaccurate documentation can also create issues with patient care as well as from a legal standpoint. Beware of things such as drop-down menus, copy forward charting, a patient's stated weight versus the patient's actual weight. This is of particular concern with dosing medications and radiology procedures that require contrast. Also beware of kilograms versus pounds when dealing with entering patient weights. Drop-down menus can make choosing different medications or doses quick and easy, but it is important to pay close attention when using these tools, as it is easy to choose the wrong item. Make sure and review for accuracy prior to signing off. Also, copy forward can create some challenges when there is a bad outcome. It is easy to see when someone has just copied another note forward. This raises question of accuracy as well as integrity of the patient assessment. One thing to keep in mind when it is necessary to complete an incident report because of an adverse event or a near miss has occurred, be sure not to mention the completion of this report in the patient's medical record. These incident reports are used for quality improvement purposes and usually are protected from discovery in the case of a claim or a lawsuit. However, by mentioning these reports in the patient's medical record can arguably open these reports to discovery and thus be turned over to plaintiff's counsel in the case of a claim or a lawsuit. Late entries into the medical record can also create issues when defending the care of a patient. Clearly, patient care comes first, and documentation can wait once the patient is stable. However, when this occurs, make sure the documentation is entered accurately and as soon as possible and reflects the time the care was provided. It will be fresh on your mind and will help you capture the events accurately. Enter the date and the time the patient care actually occurred, as well as the date and time of the note itself. If you are still on a paper record, you should also add your initials to the entry. Alterations to medical records can be seen as self-serving. Remember, in an electronic record, every entry and access is memorialized with the person's name, date, and time of the entry. Early entries into the medical records are those that are entered prior to the care being provided. Consider in a pre-op area where the anesthesia provider documents the medications prior to the patient being put under anesthesia. The anesthesia provider may do this because he always gives the same dose of medications for this population of patient and knows what dose he's going to give. Now imagine that for whatever reason, the surgery gets canceled, and now we have an entry in the medical record showing the patient received medications that were never given. Besides the fact that this is a bad practice, it also can have regulatory concerns for falsification of records and fraud. There can also be board actions brought against clinicians for such actions. Beware of having multiple patient records open at the same time. This can lead to documenting in the wrong patient's chart by toggling back and forth and mistakenly adding information that is inaccurate in the wrong medical record, and thus the need to be deleted and corrected, or even worse, care provided to the wrong patient based on inaccurate documentation. There may be times where documentation errors have been made and thus need to be corrected or clarified. In this situation, make sure to follow your organization's policies and procedures. When the clarification needs to be done in a paper record, do not delete the mistakes, but simply draw a line through the incorrect entry and then add the corrections next to it. Make sure to date, time, and sign the correction in order to reflect the time the correction was made. Never cross out the original note so that it is illegible. You should be able to read what was there originally. Corrections in an electronic record are similar to that in a paper record. However, in an electronic record, the date, time, and author of the entry is typically automatically entered. Sometimes, if you are unable to make a change to the original note, a new note may be necessary to correct the one that is in error. Also, be aware that some organizations have time frame limits as to when a medical record can be accessed. So check with your facility to understand the policy on this. When adding information into the medical record, be sure and use the term addendum. Again, add the date, time, and signature to this note, and make sure to reference the note that you are making the addendum to so it's easily traceable. Never make a correction or an addendum to a medical record after a claim or lawsuit has been filed. This can be viewed as self-serving purpose and creates difficulty when trying to defend a claim. Also, do not destroy documents once you are alerted to a potential claim or lawsuit. This can be used against you in a spoliation claim. When care is documented close to real time, it is viewed as an accurate accounting of events because they are made before the clinician becomes aware of an adverse event, and thus the documentation isn't made in reaction to an adverse event. So it is important to document as timely as possible. It is understood that it's not always practical to document in real time, such as during a code or another urgent patient event. Patient care comes first and takes priority over documentation. However, it is important to document the care provided as soon as possible. Make sure when documentation is made at a later date, you document the date and time of the actual event. When an electronic record, there will be an automatic timestamp when the entry was made, so it is important to document the time the event occurred so it is clear to other clinicians. Also beware, during the discovery part of a lawsuit, plaintiff counsel oftentimes will demand this information, showing who all entered the record and when, as well as showing what entries or alterations have been made. You may hear it referred to as the forensic report. Some other things to be aware of when documenting in the patient's medical record include the use of proper grammar, ensuring your words are spelled correctly. Imagine a patient care note being displayed in front of a jury and grammar is poor and words are misspelled. This may discount the credibility of the author. Give specific descriptions of what you see and measure, such as the wound measures 2 inches by 4 inches and has purulent drainage. There is no foul smell. Or the urine output this shift measured 500 cc's and was straw yellow in color. Don't place blame or joust other clinicians or departments. This information may be relevant if there's a concern and may be appropriate when completing an incident report or reporting to your supervisor, but it is not appropriate for the medical record. As we all know, social media is here to stay. Be careful what you place on social media. Patient information obviously doesn't belong on social media, but also be mindful of talking about your day at work. Let's say you work in an OB clinic and you post about a horrible patient that was seen that day. Statements such as, "She was so rude," "Her family was obnoxious and I couldn't wait to get away from them." Though there is no identifiable information in the statement, it could cause a patient to think you are referencing them and thus lead to an HR investigation and potential board investigation. Also, be careful of accepting friend requests from patients, as this can lead to blurred lines with the patient-professional relationship. Next, we're going to talk about some legal aspects of documentation in the medical record. In 2021, Coveris and the Nurses Service Organization released a liability claim report. They analyzed errors in nursing documentation and found that they were responsible for 72% of all EMR-related risk issues due to omission and other errors. Errors in documentation is the second highest reason nurses have claims brought against them. Specifically, the report found that of these errors, 50% were due to falsified patient records, 29% of the errors were due to the failure to document the treatment provided, 13% were due to documentation inadequacies and not providing an accurate picture of the care, and 4% of the errors were due to untimely documentation. Next, we will discuss some specific cases where documentation was at issue. In this case, the court found the physician negligent for misdiagnosis and imposed a $20 million verdict for the plaintiff. Here, a healthy 5-week-old child was seen in the local ER for elevated temperatures up to 104 degrees with grunting. He was diagnosed with probable viral fever and was discharged with instructions for Tylenol and sponge baths. Approximately 5 hours later, the child had not improved, and the mother and child returned to the same ER and were seen by the same physician. This time, the child was diagnosed with indigestion and was sent home an hour later. On the way home, the child deteriorated and returned to the ER. A spinal tap was performed and the child was diagnosed with Group B strep meningitis. The child ultimately was left with impaired hearing, speech, and vision. He had continued seizure activity, couldn't walk or crawl, and was incontinent. He exhibited behaviors of biting, scratching, and hitting himself. During the court proceedings, it was discovered that the ER physician had altered the child's medical record from the child's previous 2 visits, allegedly to hide the fact that he had a fever. Alterations of the medical record is relatively easy to discover with EMRs because, as we previously mentioned, the metadata that shows timestamps for every review and change to the record. To reduce the risk of this situation, it is best to fully document at the time of the patient visit. Though again, it isn't always possible to document in real time. If it is necessary to document at a later time, it is best to document the reason for the alteration along with the date and the time. This next case also presents a concern of alteration to the medical record, where the physician entered into a $3 million settlement. Here, the patient presented to the ER with complaints of shortness of breath and chest pain. He reported that he had been on an extended road trip when the chest pain started. The physician ordered a chest x-ray, which resulted as negative, and the patient was discharged home on an antibiotic. Unfortunately, the patient expired the next day with a cause of death of pulmonary embolus. The family sued the physician, and during discovery, it was found that the physician had made entries into the medical record after the patient's death. The physician noted changes to his exam notes to include that the patient had refused an EKG, had a productive cough, and his calf exam was performed. While this may have been the case, these late entries into the record raised concern of veracity, and the physician was forced to settle the case. Alterations and late entries make defensibility of a malpractice case difficult. In this next case, the state health department performed an on-site visit of a nursing home in response to a patient fall and subsequent death. As part of their review, the patient's medical record was reviewed and concerns of inaccuracy of the documentation were raised, specifically neurological checks post-fall. Ultimately, the nurse who made the entries was accused of 2 counts of intentionally placing false information in the patient's chart, each a 4-year felony. Alterations in the medical record can raise suspicion and cast doubt on the truth of the entry and actual care provided. There are other consequences too. Many states can revoke a physician or nurse's license if they are found to have altered a medical record. Some courts have found that alteration of the medical record reverses the burden to the physician, meaning that the patient is no longer required to prove the physician harmed them, but rather the physician must prove they did not. In this last section, we're going to discuss some key points from a licensure standpoint in regards to nursing practice. Though this section focuses on the state of Texas, many states have similar standards. Also keep in mind that, as mentioned previously, many medical boards may also take actions against a physician's license for certain documentation concerns. The American Nurses Association recommends that all nurses read and be familiar with the Nurse Practice Act for your particular state. They also recommend continued education on proper documentation. EMRs and new technology are ever-changing, and staying up to date with these changes and importance of accurate and complete documentation is imperative. Here I've listed a good resource for the registered nurses from the ANA, Principles for Nursing Documentation, Guidance for Registered Nurses. It speaks to nursing documentation principles and recommendations. I encourage you to review this tool as well. The Texas Board of Nursing Rule 217.11 speaks to the expectation of the RN to know and follow the Nurse Practice Act, as well as the board's rules and regulations, federal, state, and local laws that affect the RN's current area of practice. It also addresses the need for the RN to provide individualized and goal-directed care for the patient. Rule 217.11 sets the expectation for the RN to understand the reasoning for and the effects of medications and treatments, and that such are correctly administered to the patient. The second bullet here speaks specifically to documentation. Not only does it reference documentation, but that the documentation be accurate and complete and should include the patient's signs and symptoms and responses to treatment, the care provided, orders received, administration of medications and treatments, and collaboration with other healthcare team members regarding significant events of the patient's status. Again, this is from the Texas Board of Nursing, but other states have similar verbiage and expectations. I heard an attorney once say these words: good documentation will save you, poor documentation will discredit you, and no documentation will kill you. I found it to be right to the point. Good documentation ensures continuity of care, assists in the defense of a malpractice claim, and improves patient safety. Poor documentation leads one to believe the clinician was careless and can increase the likelihood of being seen as negligent and can further lead to nursing and medical board scrutiny. No documentation can lead to patient harm, legal liability, and suspension or loss of a clinician's license. In summary, accurate, complete, and timely documentation is key. Risk of a malpractice claim, as well as contributing to an adverse event, can be minimized by recognizing the common pitfalls and ensuring proper documentation practices are followed. Comprehensive education and training of all clinicians on the importance of timely, complete, and accurate documentation are key to preventing these documentation pitfalls. Furthermore, reducing the reliance on templates and copy forward and ensuring thorough documentation can reduce liability risks for clinicians and improve patient care across the continuum. Thank you for your time today, and I hope this presentation was able to give you some key takeaways on the importance of proper documentation.